This concept of the alpha male is a fascinating one. I honestly hadn't really done any deep diving into it until a couple of days ago when, as I mentioned, that video started to take off and I started to get very interesting comments on my YouTube. And I thought, you know what? I need to give this some more time and I need to actually understand better what is going on in this world, because there seems to be a subculture or a group of men who really subscribe to or believe in this way of living, this alpha male kind of mythology or whatever you want to call it, ethos, lifestyle. And for them, it seems to be very rewarding, or it seems to be very aspirational, let's say. It's something they want to work on. For me, I never really quite understood what it was. I'd heard the term alpha male, sigma male. I'd heard about some of the extreme people who we'll talk about here, but I'd never really taken it seriously. And maybe that's because I think it all kind of evolved by the time I was in my mid-30s. So I think I was a little bit past really recognizing that stuff and being, pulled into it. Having said that, if I was a lot younger, maybe I would have been really immersed in it and thought it was the most amazing thing. So I'm open to exploring it. And I want to talk through it a little bit in detail here. So I did some reading. I went and did a deep dive. I actually, would you believe, I went onto Amazon and I read several of Andrew Tate's ebooks. That seemed to be the apex alpha male example out there. There was a bunch of others as well. I read a ton of articles. I found some very interesting stuff, which I'll reference and I'll link in the chat today. And I read a lot of Wikipedia pages, I read a lot of Reddit threads, and I tried to better understand both sides of the perspective. All right, so let's look at the myth of alpha males. So where the hell did this idea of alpha males come from? That's a question in itself, because you hear this term thrown around, but what does it actually mean and where does it come from? So interestingly, if you go to Google, the term alpha male originated from some studies that were done of wolves in the wild way back in the early 20th century. I think it was 1947, was by a animal behaviorist. And then there was an author named David Mech, I think is how you say his name. In the 1970s, wrote a book called The Wolf, Ecology and Behavior of an Endangered Species. And he described that there was an alpha as the leader who won control of the pack through violent fights. Now, what happened was, for some reason, business people and human behaviorists started to kind of adopt this idea and think that they could link that same kind of behavior to men in business. And so they started to think of the term alpha male as something that represented a behavior type or an archetype in business. You can see here that this is from Google. Obviously, this is the Google generative AI putting this together. But misapplication, so the concept of alpha male was mistakenly applied to human behavior by business writers and the general public. The term has become a common trope in discussions of masculinity and social hierarchies. That's one perspective of it. Other people might say, no, it's the absolute truth and it's the way of the world, and maybe it is. But that's the original book that kind of founded the movement, and then it started to move into the more common kind of zeitgeist, if you like, after the 1970s, 80s, and I think especially since the internet era started to take off. Then you have this very interesting other term which has started to evolve and has somewhat became a bit of a joke as well. The term sigma male or sigma, it's an internet slang term. So it's a little bit more new, and it's based on, there's another letter of I think it's the Greek alphabet, which is sigma. That's where that came from, because there's alpha, omega, beta, and then sigma, I think, was another one. It's commonly regarded as the rarest type of male. A sigma male is typically denoted as an archetype of a male who is similar to the alpha male. But unlike the alpha male, sigma males are more introverted and seek to dominate themselves, in other words, self-mastery. So I think this is what it started to become. Rather than just focusing on the alpha male, there's also this other sort of secondary archetype that started to appear. And a lot of men these days seem to kind of really buy into this. The little section there, you can see Christian Bale's portrayal of Patrick Bateman in the film American Psycho is often cited as an ideal representation of a sigma male. And then also Tommy Shelby from the show Peaky Blinders. And then also Ryan Gosling, who seems to be a kind of a muted personality. So these tend to be sigma males. So there we go. So we've got a little bit of an overview of what an alpha male apparently is, the misrepresentation of it, and then also the sigma male as well. And, whether those are real or not depends on your perspective and what you want to think. In my deep dive that I did, these are some of the characteristics that I saw as kind of common to alphas. Okay. And I've got a picture of Mr. Tate there just as a representation. But these are the characteristics. Okay. So they're typically a self-made millionaire or billionaire. They're a business owner. They're highly financially successful. They've made it in the world of money and they've done it on their own terms. They're a maverick. They're someone who's, become an entrepreneur and found a way to kind of figure out how to make money and provide for themselves and their families. They're surrounded by attractive women. There's always a ton of women around them who they're sleeping with. There's a lot of polygamy going on. All the women are happy with the man sleeping with all the women, apparently. They're able to fight and protect themselves. They're physically fit and they dress very stylishly. So they're always working out. They've got a six pack. They've got massive shoulders. They're very fit physically, and they're also dressed very stylishly as a result as well. They drive sports cars. They travel first class around the world, and they live in multiple locations. So they have all these homes all around the world, and they're always sort of showing that off, driving around in fancy cars and private jets, all that kind of stuff, flashing money, going to casinos, eating out at fancy restaurants, smoking expensive cigars, drinking expensive wine, whatever. They're aggressive, outspoken, and they get their way. Now, I know this isn't always the case when it comes to the Sigma male, right? But they tend to be more aggressive and outspoken, and they're definitely getting their way in most situations. That's the kind of alpha male ethos, if you like. And I would say they don't follow the conventional lifestyle. So these are the interesting things that I've seen. I'm sure there's many more, and maybe I've generalized some too much, but I think most people would agree these tend to be the alpha male characteristics that we see. Let's flip the script and look at the beta characteristics, okay? Poor Michael Serra was my example because he seems to be a archetype for this online. So these are the ones that come up. So they're poor or they're not able to make a lot of money. So they live a meager existence or a very average level of existence. They're unable to attract women. They're unable to fight and protect themselves. They're unfit and they dress badly. They live in a generic home and they drive a normal car. They're polite, they're submissive, and they don't get what they want. And finally, they follow that conventional lifestyle of going to school, going to college, getting a job, hating their job, getting a mortgage, maybe even getting married, getting divorced, having kids, having to pay child support, and living a boring life that they really don't enjoy. This seems to be the beta characteristics, okay, on the extreme end. Again, I might have missed some things here, I don't know, but these seems to be, from what I've read and what I've looked at the last couple of days, these are the characteristics that kind of denote what a beta male would be. So what's interesting to me, and this is kind of under the surface because I've read a lot of psychology and I've learned a lot about myself as a person, and I've gone internally and thought, okay, what are the things that, if I'm really honest for myself, that I've felt in the past that would be false beliefs that would lead to either of these kind of personalities emerging. So the first one is that I need this thing or this, activity or this achievement to feel happy and to feel loved. And again, I've talked about this in other videos, the idea of external validation. It's one of the easiest ways that men mess up their lives. And I think this is one of the ones that's a mistake. They tend to fall into this idea that I need something specific outside of myself to feel happy or to feel loved as a person. And that kind of gets deep, and most people won't admit that. It took me a long time to admit that for myself, but a lot of the time the ambitions I had, that's what I was actually seeking, was just happiness or a sense of being esteemed and valued and loved. The next false belief, I think, is that men have to be, to do, or to have something specific. All right, so it kind of is aligning with the first one, but it's the idea that men in particular, if they're going to be recognized and respected and revered, they have to be, they have to do, or they have to have a certain thing in their life. I don't think that that's true now, but if you spoke to me 25 years ago, I probably did, because I saw a certain archetype that I wanted to be, and I was very determined to be that. And I think for a lot of men, they still fall into that. Whether it's societal pressure, whether it's internal pressure, whatever it is, we tend to think that way. Another one is that I am not like other men because, and then you can fill in the blank. This one can go both ways, but I think it's one of the traps we fall into is comparisonitis. Because men do tend to seek external solutions to their problems, very often they compare themselves unfavorably or over favorably to other men. I don't know if that's a term, but they look at other men and say, well, I'm better or I'm worse or whatever. And then that leads to the last one, which is I'm ahead or I'm behind of other men because of this, right? We're trying to beat other men in some way. In reality, you can't actually ever beat anyone at life. It's an infinite game, as Simon Sinek says, and you can't actually win at business or win at life. It's just how it is. But hey, we all try. So these false beliefs, I think, can really trap us if we're not careful, and we can fall into them very easily, especially if we haven't thought them through for ourselves. So I would challenge you to think about, do you have any of these beliefs under the surface? I know I have a lot of them myself. And so I think we have to really acknowledge them and say, is this something I'm stuck in? The last couple of questions I have for you here today are around the idea of alpha males. And I want to ask you, based on the characteristics that I explained before, do you actually know any alpha males in your life? Do you personally know any alpha males? Yes, there's a lot of examples of them online of people who seem to live this alpha male lifestyle, but do you personally know any in your life? I'm curious to know. If you do, add it to the comments. I'd love to hear about them and who they are as a person. But I think it's actually a very rare thing that we would ever run into someone who espouses and displays all the characteristics that we think are an alpha male. Most people aren't a one extreme or the other, right? They're a mix, and that's why I use the term men in the middle. We're somewhere in the balance there. But if you look at the alpha male kind of psychology or the culture or the ethos, a lot of us aspire, I think, in some ways to be the alpha. But actually, in reality, we've never actually met one. Again, there's plenty of examples of people who display that online through their social media, but there's very few in real life. And the last question I have for you is, if you actually did know an alpha male in your life, would you enjoy being around them? Do you think that person would actually be enjoyable to spend time with? Would they actually make you feel better as a person about yourself? And would they help you to become the very best version of yourself? That's my question to think about, because very often I think we look at these idealized versions of men, and whether it is an alpha or a sigma or whatever it is, and we say, wow, if I can just be like that, or I can be more like that, right? But if you think about it, if you were around a man like that, is that a person who you'd actually gain benefit from being around? Or would you just be serving their needs? It's an interesting thought to consider. The last thought I have for you today, my friend, is this one. It's something that's taken me a long time, I would say 30 years of personal development to understand, and that's that only you can decide what your identity will be. Very often we can fall into the trap of comparing ourselves to other men, to ideals, whatever, but the truth is no one else can actually decide for you. You have to decide personally where you fit. I know where I fit in the world. I do believe I'm a man in the middle, and I feel very comfortable in that, and I feel confident, and I believe I'm making an impact in the right way as a result. But you have to decide for yourself what you want to be and who you want to be and how you want to live your life in the world.